Thank you for tuning in to Common Filth Radio, episode 60. I'm guest host Toilet Law, and it's an honor to help out Common Filth while he takes a short absence. You may recognize me from the WriteStuff.biz, where I've appeared as an article writer, I've appeared on The Daily Shoah, and I've made parody songs, and I also have a YouTube channel where I produce postcards from the American wasteland, which from here out is going to be a bi-weekly audio mini podcast that's produced in conjunction with the WriteStuff.biz. You can reach me on Twitter at Toilet Law, and again, follow my YouTube channel. I'm very excited for this opportunity. I actually went out and bought a microphone and pop filter to do this, instead of using the Galaxy Note 3 that I've used to produce my audio bits in the past. I bought those things through Amazon using the affiliate link below, so I would encourage you, if you're going to go out and buy Christmas gifts, click on the Amazon link, throw Common Filth a few shekels for his work. I didn't have access to Common Filth's emails or Ask FM or anything like that, so any questions I'm going to do today is going to be through the subreddit Common Filth, which you can reach at commonfilth.reddit.com. Before we get started, just to let you know a little bit about myself. I'm 37 years old, I'm married, I have a 9-year-old beautiful stepdaughter, and I've been practicing criminal defense for 7 years. I'm a licensed attorney, and I've seen things, but I also have been part of what you could call the alt-right community for about a year and a half, and that's where I discovered the WriteStuff.biz, mostly through Poll on 4chan, now on 8chan, and following Moraku on YouTube. Common Filth and I share a lot of similar views, but we're not 100% in sync. He's a bit younger than I am, and he just sees things through a different lens sometimes. But we would agree on a whole heck of a lot, so let's get started. I hope that I can provide some good information and insight for all the questions that you may have today. So I'll start with some of the smaller ones. Hi, Toilet Law, can you give us some fun nigger stories from work? Well, what I would recommend you do, if you get a chance, go find Chimp Out. And if you go through their forums, there's a thread that I had as More Miserable Crap that basically was my own sticky thread with a lot of stories there. I mean, they tend to just all kind of bleed into each other at this point, but it's not something that I really want to use this forum for. You know, I want to do something a little bit more meaningful than just talk about Tyrone and Shaniqua and their latest misadventures. So go to chimpout.com, find that thread. You'll find plenty of entertainment there on that subject. Next, is Morikawa the baddest goy? Well, I haven't met him personally, but I followed him on YouTube, finding his videos from Poll, and he's what led me to the WriteStuff.biz and inspired me to do some of my own parody work. Behind the scenes, he's a really hard worker. He helps out more than you could probably imagine, and of course he has to produce the Merchant Minute in time for the recording of the Daily Shoah. He's a hard worker and a really good guy, and I'm glad he's on our side. Next, do we need larger ovens or more ovens? Oven manufacturing needs to increase. That's all I can say about that. Do you think the alt-right is slowly coming together in a more cohesive group? If so, do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing? The alt-right, in my opinion, is a spectrum. Not like autism, come on, give me a break. But it's a spectrum. There's a lot of different people that comprise the alt-right, and I would say that it would start on the left, if you will. Look at some of the people that you see on YouTube. Look at Sargon of Akkad, some of the people attached to Gamergate. They're not going to describe themselves as rightists or conservatives, but they would say that they're shitlords. These are people that fight the good fight. They fight feminism, progressivism, and what we call the dildo sphere, if you will. But they're not going to agree with us on a lot of things. You take Gamergate, for example. Gamergate is roughly described as reactionary, but when that term came about, a lot of the people that you would see on Reddit for Kotaku and Action would bristle at the idea of being called reactionary. Oh no, we're definitely not rightists, we're definitely liberal. We have liberal proper views about egalitarianism, and everybody's equal and everybody's involved, and we have trannies and gays and blacks and women in our movement, so we're definitely not reactionary. They're egalitarians, and as Common Filth has said in the past, egalitarians are part of the problem, that not everybody is the same. God may have created us all in the same manner, but we're not all the same. There are biological differences, and that's one of the major themes with the rightstuff.biz, which you could describe as a type of white nationalism, in that we just acknowledge that there are races that are different. White people have high trust. White people have their own cultural values. We've developed differently than blacks have. Africans have developed their own biological evolution, and their culture is different than ours. Everybody has their own characteristics, and it's generally better for societies when societies are formed around like-minded people who share the same qualities and characteristics. So stepping back, going back to the people who might be on the furthest left of this quote-unquote alt-right spectrum, they wouldn't share those views. They would not go and say, well, I think that having a white area is a good thing. Blacks having their own place to do their thing is a good thing. Same with the Muslims. They have their area. The Japanese have their area. The Chinese have their area. Nations work when they're organized around a uniform society. Now, that's not to say that I believe that it should be a whites-only society, but America functions best when whites are more of a demographic supermajority. I would say between 75 to 85%. You wouldn't find those sort of opinions among the Gamergate crowd, but they do serve a very important function, because we're not just fighting a demographic fight here, it's a cultural war. And the cultural war is being fought in a lot of different fronts. We're all fighting feminists, we're all fighting progressives, so we share that same common enemy with the far left end of the alt-right spectrum. And then you've got guys like Common Filth. Common Filth, this program, it's aimed at a slightly different audience. I think this is more of a younger crowd, but his opinions and his themes are very similar to what we have. He tends to focus more on fighting cultural degeneracy, which you'll see people pushing faggotry, trannies, that sort of thing, and people who fight that, the cultural defenders in that end, those are part of the alt-right, and they may not share all of the same views. Then you've got the rightstuff.biz, us. We're a lot of different people. You take Mike Enoch and myself and Hateful Heretic and Seventh Son and all the different personalities on there. We have a lot of different views, and we're not one to cast somebody out simply because they may have different religious views, or they may not be entirely the same on the Jewish question. We're not necessarily disassociating ourselves from actual Nazis, even though that's a distinct minority. You go back into our archives, you'll find a few people who really kind of pushed the edge on the 1488 Heil Hitler thing. Hell, we had Weave on, and Weave actually went on our radio program and talked about vivisecting Jews. So, yeah, I would say that he would be on the other extreme, but likewise, we're all fighting the same common enemy. So it won't be a cohesive group, because I'm sure that if I asked Sargon of Akkad to debate, I think he's a significantly better polemicist than I could ever be. I don't know if I'd do well in debating him, but Mike Enoch and him, that would be an interesting discussion, but we probably would be more at opposition to each other than we would be on the same page. So it won't be that cohesive a group, but it is a spectrum, and we do have common enemies, and that is a good thing. We have to fight this on all fronts, and if only one type of voice was out there broadcasting, leading the fight, it may not attract all of the possible people to come on board. The rightstuff.biz isn't for everybody. It's really very edgy, meme-oriented, but there's also an intellectual side to it. But if you're not on board with, or if you're not ready for issues like the Jewish questions, issues like white nationalism, it's really a higher level, it's kind of alt-right 300 level stuff. If that was the only voice out there, we may not be as successful, but what you'll see, especially with the rise of social media and the ability to broadcast and how cheap it is. I mean, hell, I spent $40 for a microphone and a pop filter. I could get a free account on SoundCloud or YouTube and just publish away. The message can definitely get out there. So the variety of voices that put out that message can furnish it in their own manner and attract a larger crowd towards the same goals. I mean, right now, fighting the cultural war is the most important goal we have. And if the day ever comes to where we now have to start fighting among the right to decide the ultimate issues of the day, I think that means we'll have made significant progress, but I don't see that day coming anytime soon. Next question, a similar topic. Could you elaborate on your opinion of Milo Yiannopoulos? Milo got famous. He's part of Breitbart. Breitbart, if you may not remember, was an internet journalist who originally was part of the Drudge Report. He died a few years ago after separating to form the Breitbart media websites, and Milo's a major contributor to that. Milo's main claim to fame lately seems to be kind of trolling feminists, glomming onto the Gamergate idea I mean, he's a media figure, and he wants popularity, and I think to some extent he's milking Gamergate for as many likes, clicks, views, or donations, if he has any. I mean, I don't think he does, but he's riding that wave to get popular. He probably does not have white nationalist views. He's a blatant faggot. He goes to Gamergate things to get laid, and he's bragged about doing that. So, I mean, he does have an idea of degeneracy about him. So worshipping or ball-washing Milo isn't really in our best interest. However, again, he does serve a purpose. He's probably in the left center of that alt-right spectrum that I discuss. I mean, he does have a lot of the same enemies and opponents that we do. A lot of the anti-Gamergate or radical feminists all really have a problem with him. Look at the YouTube video where I think he went to a recent slut walk and got kicked out. So you see, he does things that benefit our side of the equation. But I'm not going to call him the greatest thing of all time. I did on Facebook, I called him a fantastic faggot, and he would be the last guy to put in the ovens. And of course, he did thank me for that opinion, so I'm grateful for that. Here's another question. I've watched enough Tommy Sotomayor to be convinced that black women are spawns of Satan. Though feminism has turned women of all races into gross cunts, what is it that makes black women just really evil characters? Well, Sotomayor, while I would describe him as a part of that alt-right spectrum, his target is mainly the didn't-do-nothing crowd, the Black Lives Matter crowd, the people that are apologists for basic niggerisms. He did a debate with David Duke, which you would never see any mainstream black media figure ever do. They would be immediately dismissive of him. They wouldn't have him on his show. And he did a couple hours with the guy, which is pretty impressive. Sotomayor's smart. I like his productions. And he does what I would call black nationalism. Not that he necessarily just advocates for a black-only space, but he wants blacks to be better than what they are right now, which isn't a whole heck of a lot. And his main target is the black woman. Why black women act the way they do? Well, I mean, they're women, and so there's already a question of whether or not they have agency, and then they're black, which makes them even less possessing of agency. And black women are dependent upon the government for most of their existence. Their fecundity rates, they produce babies like you wouldn't believe. And they don't have the money to pay for that thing, so they demand welfare from the government. They demand the white man's dollar to pay for their existence and subsidize what they do. So that gives them a sense of entitlement. And that's been passed on for generations now. You combine that with the decimation of the black family. Black men are generally either in prison, unemployed. They don't get married anywhere near other races. I mean, black children are born out of wedlock a vast majority of the time. So the women are left to try and raise these kids alone. And these are women who are already soured on black men who won't stay with them. And the black men are too busy chasing white women. And they can't be depended on to hold a job or to bring any income in. That's not illegitimate. So you're already putting the wrong person in charge of raising the children. The children grow up to become black men and women who are dysfunctional. It's a dysfunctional process that just breeds more dysfunction. So I guess if you're the cause of and end result of that dysfunction, you'd be pretty bitter and antisocial and dysfunctional too. Next question. I would like you to make commentary on the news surrounding the band Were. They called out a band named Gloss for being a shit punk band that has boys running around in panties and have gotten dropped from one of their labels at the time of writing. MU has a thread on the drama, as well as Twitter and Facebook posts galore about it. Love what you do, CF. God bless. I have an affinity for punk music. My favorite band is Bad Religion. I got into this type of music when I was in high school in the early 90s. I love Bad Religion, Social Distortion, Operation Ivy, Rancid, No Use for a Name. A lot of that stuff from back then really got me off the beaten track, so to speak. Kind of started me towards being an edgelord. But music nowadays, I haven't followed recent bands. My younger cousin likes to ask me about this punk band or that punk band because we will still go to a show together, but I don't know any of them. So I did some looking into this, and there was a website that had Gloss's EP, a couple of songs on a mini album, and I listened to them, and the music wasn't terribly compelling. It was standard punk rock, but it was described as being incredibly brave and one of the most important things to come out in a long time by the person trying to sell the EP, of course. It was just your basic bitch punk rock beats. Nothing compelling about it, but they were singing about being trannies and fighting the patriarchy and all of this bullshit. And that was what they claimed made them so brave. So I would say that the brave act, of course, being is to call out these people for what they are. Just a bunch of boys running around in panties. I didn't hear Wur's music, but I did see that they did get dropped by their album, and I think some other group is called them out, but not disassociated from them, and even the band itself has now backed off and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and run with their tail between their legs. Real punk rock, I know. But this is all part of a larger question, a larger cultural question. What is punk rock? How do you define punk rock? You go back to bands like the Sex Pistols, you go back to the Dead Kennedys, go back to the Descendants. Yeah, there's always been a hint of left-wing ideology behind the music, but it was very counterculture. It was very against the man. You defined yourself as punk when you had individual thoughts. You learned to think for yourself, and you did things your own way. And you wore those ridiculous jackets with the spikes on it. And you did your hair in spiky mohawks, and you wore Doc Martens and ripped jeans, and you put patches on your denim jacket and that sort of thing. Stuff that nowadays is seen as cliche, but back then we ascribed some sort of individualism to it. That was what punk rock really was. That's the term, individualism. We were individuals. We weren't part of some collective. We could think for ourselves. We weren't stuck in the mores of religion. We weren't part of mass culture. We didn't consume media for its own sake. We saw the world for what it really was. And nowadays, you try and pass off those things, but it's being said by people who are part of the main culture. In other words, how edgy is it to sit there and advocate for faggots and gays and dildos and trannies and all of this shit when that is what's being pushed down our throat by popular media? How edgy is it to go out there and sing about fighting the patriarchy? How edgy is it out there to say that we're going to fight white racists? I would argue that a modern punk movement would be what we're doing now. We're fighting the common values of a society that is in opposition to what we believe in. We're fighting against ideas and values being pushed down our throat by popular media, the government, our schools, the indoctrination that goes on every single day. That's truly the new punk rock, though the people who claim they're punk rock nowadays would never admit to it. The punk rock that happens nowadays advocates for those positions that we fight so hard against. They advocate for the dildocracy, dildolek, or whatever you want to call it. All of the things that you see on the Common Filth broadcast, these are all pushed as positive things, and they're sung about by bands like Gloss, and they're pushed by this punk movement that they call themselves nowadays, which is nothing more than pushing for the mainstream opinion and trying to indoctrinate people to think that, yeah, it's okay to worship your own asshole, that the orgasm is the center of the existence of human life, that you should not have a self-identity, you need to go along to get along, and you need to embrace multiculturalism and egalitarianism, and everybody's the same and everybody's happy. Well, that's all bullshit, you know, and that's why I would suggest that the alt-right community now is the modern punk rock. I'd like to share with you some excerpts from a punk manifesto, which was written by Greg Graffin, who's the lead singer of Bad Religion. Now, before I get started on that, a word on Bad Religion, my absolute most favorite band. But when you go and you look at their breadth of their work, you can see how things have kind of evolved. Go back to their work in the 1980s. Look at How Could Hell Be Any Worse? Look at the album Suffer. They sing about You Are the Government. How Much Is Enough? Do What You Want. Then you've got No Control. Look at Change of Ideas. You. The World Won't Stop. Anxiety. Sanity. These are all great songs. But then as you go past, say, get into The Gray Race, No Substance, The New America, stuff that happened around the turn of the millennium, they take a different angle. They take a different approach. And the most recent offerings they've had through Descent with Man and True North, there's less of a true punk sense behind the lyrics. It's not about thinking for yourself as much. Yeah, there's some good songs on there, I'm not going to deny that, but and you look at The Process of Belief, and there are songs on there like Bored and Extremely Dangerous, which is basically about idle white punk youth and the waste of life that they have. And then there's Kyoto Now. I went to a Warped Tour show where they led off with this song, a sped up punk rock song about the fucking Kyoto Accords. I mean, really? This is what you're going to inspire the youth of America with, huh? That's what they've turned into. So, while I still love the band, you can definitely track their arc towards more of a dildo approach, which I would probably lay at the hands of Graffin himself. As he's gotten older, he's become a professor in the California university system. Smart guy, accomplished in his field, but he's surrounded by the people that reinforce the opinions that we're fighting against, so of course his music is going to reflect that. So going back to this manifesto, Graffin starts with some paragraphs that introduce sections that I think are worth reflecting on. First he says, punks are not beasts. Punk is a reflection of what it means to be human. What separates us from other animals? Our ability to recognize ourselves and express our own genetic uniqueness. Ironically, the commonly held view among the marketeers and publicity engines stresses the animalistic, primitive nature of punks and their music. Well, what does separate us from other animals? The ability to think and rationalize and express ourselves. And it looks nowadays that punk has become narrowed down to just one set of opinions and one acceptable point of view. So is it really being human to force conformity upon others? Well, that's just my thought. Next, punk is the personal expression of uniqueness that comes from the experiences of growing up in touch with our human ability to reason and ask questions. Well, what if you ask a question about why must I accept hordes of immigrants coming across my borders? Why must I accept that any time I advocate for anything that's beneficial to whites, I'm called a racist? But when blacks or Hispanics or other races do the same thing, it's called empowerment. Why is it that if you use your innate ability to reason and ask questions and cite the facts and statistics, you're called a shitlord, you're citing hate facts, and you're oppressing people? Why are your questions shut down? Well, I would suggest nowadays that punk has gotten away from that. It's now about how much you can be so different that you're like everyone else who thinks that they're part of the oppressed outside crowd, but instead are part of the main culture. Look at Tumblr. These are people whose entire existence is based upon how oppressed and how different they are from the average person, but when you look at popular media, they're celebrated. They don't even understand that outside of their own little hug box, the entire world loves the shit that they push. And this one's the most offensive. Punk is a movement that serves to refute social attitudes that have been perpetuated through willful ignorance of human nature. Well, what could better describe what's happening nowadays? Is it human nature for us to desire to, as Common Filth would put it, deposit our biological material in the input of the GI tract, where we basically leave our waste? Is that where we want to leave the seeds for our human offspring? Do we want to pursue sexual mores and values that do not result in life but only result in death? Do we want to establish bug chasing in the pause community as the highest standard that we need to approach in life? That is complete ignorance of human nature. That is a social attitude that needs refutation. The culture that we find ourselves surrounded by is the enemy, and it needs to be refuted. And their social attitudes have been perpetuated through ignorance of human nature. Though I might suggest maybe they've taken advantage of some of our worst parts of human nature, such as the desire to fit in, the desire to belong, and the desire to follow a leader. I think that the fact that the younger crowd today, the millennials and their cohorts, they don't have a shared social space outside of the computer screen. They don't get out of their house, they don't put down their TVs, their cell phones, their tablets, their computers, and they don't go out and be together. And so they find their social interactivity through cyberspace. And when enough people kind of create the idea that, oh, it's great to be genderqueer or gender fluid or bisexual or whatever, then it becomes a self-perpetuating boulder that rolls downhill, and everybody wants to be part of that force because it's unstoppable, but also because everybody kind of, they're inside their safe space. They love each other. They'll only hear the positive sides of their degenerate beliefs, and nobody's going to step up with reality and question them and question what they're doing to themselves and the effects that they're going to have on popular culture. As the recent South Park episode would show, those are sort of people who would take reality out and hang it with the public square. So going back to the original question, I think that we're calling out Gloss for being a bunch of boys in panties is actually the true punk thing to do. And of course, backing away from it and hiding with your tail between your legs is a bunch of faggoty bullshit. So next question. Hey CF or Toilet Law. First off, I want to thank you for being the way you are. You bring me cautious hope of what's to come. With that out of the way, I'm a biracial, white mom and black dad, ginger, 17-year-old living in Ohio. My family's Christian and have raised me and my siblings as such. However, recently things have come up. My mother and sister have adopted a guy who is gender fluid, and all three have been part of a gay pride parade, which I don't necessarily find abhorrent, but severely unnecessary. My sister's 13. My dad comes from an extreme pro-black, sometimes anti-white family. It's gotten to the point where it has gone from, I can't wait to see my cousins and aunt, to I never want to see them again, let alone be related. Gladly, my dad hasn't become that, and unusual is the only one I can talk to. My brother goes to a left college that's overrun with homosexuals. I don't usually have a problem with homosexuals, seeing as my grandfather and great-uncles are gay, but seeing them all over the place makes me sick of them. I myself have no physical contact with anyone besides my dad that I can express myself to, and I don't want to burden him with dealing with his son that messes up all the time. I'm not a very social person. I don't have many friends, but I try to be loving as a Christian should, but my depression and irritability make it extremely hard to do so. My question is, what should I do for the future? How do I keep these kinds of things from my future family, that being my offspring and their offspring? Well, I first have a hard time grasping the concept of a biracial ginger, but I'm assuming that this is actually true and correct. You're 17 years old, you're the product of a white person and a black person getting together. I'm not a massive fan of interracial dating or miscegenation. The idea that whites and blacks should reproduce, it really is part of what's breeding out whites. But that's not really the gist of this question. The point being that you're going to have a hard time because as a biracial person, you're not going to fit in as entirely white. And I guess with the ginger hair, you're going to have a real hard time fitting in as black. So you run the risk of being ostracized by both cultures. Your best bet for finding a spouse is going to be finding somebody who's in a similar situation as you. But, that's not the main issue of your question. Your question is, what do you do with the degeneracy that's plagued your family? Well, I'd like to share my own experiences. I think might give you some sort of insight. My biological father is gay. He's also dead. He died from AIDS in a mental hospital, a ward of the state. I saw him last when I was 12, one day. I saw him one time. And then before that, I hadn't seen him since I was a toddler. So I don't really have any memories with this individual, but he is my biological father. My mother loved him dearly. They met in college. They're both educated, and he was a smart guy, went on to be a music teacher, but for some reason, he just really liked dick in his ass. And that became what was his focus in life. He left my mother to pursue the homosexual relationships that he had kept from her, and this became his life. Well, he was no longer a music teacher. Last I saw, he died. He was an employee at a Walmart. And his gay lovers are all jealous of the fact that he had a child. And I thank God I had nothing to do with that relationship. But that shows you that there really are no positive, well, it's not that there aren't very many positive, intact families that have active homosexuals in their midst. There are some, absolutely. I know of a couple, but by and large, the pursuit of homosexual activities, the pursuit of these sort of paused out, degenerate lifestyles really only brings stress and damage to a family. And the fact that your mother's side of the family seems to welcome this sort of thing and want to expose their children to it is disturbing. I mean, you're 17, you've got a sister's 13. She is very impressionable. I mean, you are too, but the fact that you're part of the Common Filth community on Reddit, or that you appreciate what Common Filth does, shows that you don't want to be part of this. And your sister shouldn't be part of this, but I don't know if there's going to be a lot that you can really do about it. You can't really strike out against your mother's side of the family and against your homosexual relatives when you say you don't want to be part of celebrating gay culture, the pause culture, if you will. So what are you left to do? You have a father, and I would say that is your biggest advantage. I managed to turn out all right, despite the fact that I really didn't know my biological father. My mother married a few people in between that weren't terribly good. They were abusive, and they weren't a general net positive on my life. But my mother was there the whole time. She helped me get through college. She helped me get through law school. And even though she had her own mental health issues, she turned out a good person, I'd like to think. I wish she was still around to see what happened to me. But she committed suicide my second year of law school, so I did not get a chance to say, hey, look, I graduated law school, I passed the bar exam, I am employed as an attorney, I have a lot of debt, but I do make a decent living, and I have a family, and I own a home, and I'm doing okay. So if you have a person in your life that's going to be there for you, that will let you talk to them, and let you give you advice, then you should be okay. And in her latter years, my mother was my best friend. When I was in high school, I kind of was an asshole. Before I went off to college, my mother and I were a little bit estranged, but about the time I graduated college and came back, my mother and I were as close as ever, and we shared a lot of experiences together. In fact, my defining memory of the 9/11 attacks were that I went to the only payphone at the law school and immediately called my mother. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, and we were both on the phone, scared off our wits, saying, holy shit, we're about to have another war. But that's a memory that I had with her. I was able to share everything with her. I told her everything I possibly could. So if you have someone like that, your father is not going to push you away. Let me put you that way. You're 17, but in 10 or 15 years, when hopefully you have a wife and children, your father is going to want to be part of your life for that. He wants to see his grandkids. He wants to see his offspring succeed. No decent father is going to sit there and say, hey, I don't care what happens to my children. And you're 17. It's time to start making some life plans. Are you going to be able to go to college? If not, what are you going to do with your life? And if you think you're going to go to college and get a degree in English or political science or sociology or psychology or any of those things, don't fucking waste your time. There's no jobs for something like that. Having an expensive piece of paper and a useless degree basically just means that you paid a lot of money for something that's worth shit. You'd be better off buying a timeshare. Common Filth goes into this a lot, and I will echo those sentiments. The trades are important. The fact that you can weld something, that you can work with air conditioning, that you can do electricity, that you can do plumbing, auto repair. Those things are very important skills to have, and you will be able to market yourself and make a living and not have the type of debt that I have, for example. If you're not paying $400, $500, up to $1,000 a month in student loans, that's extra money you put in your pocket to save for a down payment for a house or some of these other things that millennials with useless college degrees can't seem to get. So think about your future. Think about what you're going to do with yourself. If you really do want to go to college, take a couple of years and just work. Work a 40-hour-a-week job. Try and find your own place. Try and have some self-sustainability. The exercising agency is important for younger people and learning to sustain yourself, how to pay for your own housing, your own food, creating a budget, learning those things are very important life skills that a lot of people don't have. So you need to focus your attention in this direction. And the last thing I'd like to share with you is this beautiful article in the New York Times, The Strange Case of Anna Stubblefield. The New York Times, being the bastion of morality and dildo culture, has written this extensive article about this woman who was a speech therapist, for lack of a better term, for a person named DJ. And she ends up with a relationship with DJ. And she ends up being prosecuted for raping DJ. How did we get here? Well, this is an interesting tale. See, Stubblefield teaches at a university, and she felt bad for DJ. DJ is a 30-year-old black cripple invalid. He, quote, has cerebral palsy that leaves him prone to muscle spasms in his face, his neck, his torso, and his arms and hands. Anna acknowledges that it's hard for DJ to stay in one position, and that muscle contractions sometimes twist his spine and clench his fingers in a useless ball. So, here we have somebody who wears diapers, cannot dress himself, and can only walk if somebody steadies him. But goddamn is he one fine piece of ass. Anna knows that DJ screams when he's unhappy, and he chirps when he's excited, but he cannot control his vocal cords. And Anna knows that at 35 years old, DJ has never said a word in his life. But Anna insists that there's something about him. She takes issue with part of his diagnosis, that he's not just spastic, but has a low IQ. In 2004, 5 years before she met him, a clinical psychologist named Wayne Tillman, who works in New Jersey, assessed DJ and found that his impairments precluded any formal testing of intelligence. But certain facts could be inferred. His comprehension seems to be quite limited. Well, I mean, he is a black cripple invalid. His attention span was very short, see previous comment, and he lacks the cognitive capacity to understand and participate in decisions, see previous comment. DJ could not even carry out basic preschool level tasks. Again, black cripple invalid. Anyway, DJ had people made his legal guardians, but then he meets Anna, who says, oh no, this is completely wrong. DJ might not be unable to speak or hold a pencil, but those are motor skills, not mental ones. And their absence doesn't mean his mind is blank. What if DJ had a private chamber in his head, a place where grown-up thoughts were trapped behind his palsy? Of course, she couldn't test that for IQ tests, so she needed to find a way to get him to communicate. So what does Anna do? She begins to work with him using a controversial method called facilitated communication. She puts old DJ in front of a computer, and with her hand underneath his arm, or on his shoulder, or on his elbow, she helps him type things out. And apparently this results in words after 30 years of silence. So, eventually Anna reveals the fact that she's in love with DJ, and DJ somehow manages to communicate with his guardians about this relationship. So, what is DJ, the crippled, black, utterly devoid of agency individual, this person who has not said a word his entire life, what does he type out? No one's taking advantage of anyone. I've been trying to seduce Anna for years, and she resisted valiantly. And then she, in front of his guardians, DJ apparently typed out, kiss me. I mean, if that isn't some shit. You've got this guy, this potato, this black potato, sitting in a wheelchair, drooling like an invalid, barely registering environmental stimuli, and he comes up with words like seduce and valiantly. And of course, who's the target of his seduction? Anna. So what about this Anna? Marjorie Anna Stubblefield. Well, she goes by her middle name pronounced with an aristocratic A, so Anna Stubblefield. But then again, she grew up Jewish, so it should be more like Anna Stubblefield, field. Anyway, she grew up in Michigan, and she believes that she has the responsibility of Tikkun Olam, Repairing the World, whatever the fuck that means. So she wrote a book called Ethics Along the Color Line, and she's about the most dildo person in the world. She loves the Diary of Anne Frank. I mean, she just was Anne Frank, according to somebody else who was in that production. Her parents were involved in politics, environmentalism, and women's rights, but she also was strong with people with disabilities. So, of course, she got into Braille and sign language, but she also got a PhD in 2000, becoming a prominent scholar in the field of Africana philosophy. Okay, Africana philosophy, what is that? Is that like, it takes a village to give me that? I don't know, but she has published widely on race and ethics and served as the chairwoman of the American Philosophical Association's Committee on the Status of Black Philosophers. The status. Yeah, there are no black philosophers. What, D-Ray Mackinson and the Black Lives Matter or the Gives Me That Twitter people? Those are philosophers, huh? You could really just pick anything. I mean, Tyrone Bingham's the Crack Gives Me That giveaway. He could be a philosopher too. He's a black philosopher, but there are no black philosophers. But she's also the only white scholar to ever say that our world is in shambles. White supremacy is central to this state of affairs, and we cannot repair the world without ending it. So think about it. These people on Twitter, these motherfuckers on YouTube that sit there and beat you over the head with how ashamed you should be to be white, what are they doing? They're raping black invalids. They're taking guys in wheelchairs that can't communicate and basically might run the risk of drowning in their own drool, and they're trying to fuck them. I can't possibly imagine a black invalid getting an erection, but maybe it's possible. They have no control over any other bodily function. I guess their circulatory system's intact, but she admitted to having sex with this guy and being in love with him and having a relationship, but Anna's married. Boy, talk about being a cuckold. Can you imagine being the husband of Anna Stubblefield? You have kids. You're married to her. You have no idea something's wrong with your marriage until prosecutors show up at your house and say, oh, by the way, we're arresting your wife for raping a black person in a wheelchair who could barely move or function or wipe the drool from their mouth or even feed themselves, and they wear a diaper and they shit themselves regularly, but she's in love with them and not you. Man, your ego must be about a quarter of an inch tall, if that. These are the people out there. This is the culture, and the New York Times just writes this loving piece about Anna, about how oppressed she is, and she's going to face up to 40 years in prison. They're going to try and get consecutive time out of her for every time she fucks the potato. But, you know, I guess you call it a yam. I guess if it's going to be a black invalid, it's going to be a yam or a sweet potato or something. But anyway, she's facing a lot of time in prison, and it's like, it's just love. People only love. I mean, come on. It's 2015. I can't even. The sad part is I've spent all my time recording this. I won't be able to put this on Ovenworthy, but then on Ovenworthy.com, people have been really slow in getting shit done, so I might have time. But this is just some of the funniest things. One of the funniest things I've read in a while. Had to stick it on the end of Common Filth. It's fun. I'm glad I got to riff on it. I appreciate you all tuning in. I appreciate the opportunity to be on Common Filth, and I hope I get a chance to do it again. It's actually tougher than you think, trying to put together almost an hour of material, edit it. But it was a lot of fun. I do appreciate it. And please check out my YouTube channel. I'll be putting out another postcards from the American Wasteland soon. Listen to various media we've got at therightstuff.biz. Right now, I think we're hosting up to 4 different programs. We've got the Daily Show. We've got bi-weekly Saturday Night YAM, which is kind of a skit program. I know we've got Fash the Nation, which is a really fantastic, serious production about American politics. Fash Britannia's come out, and in fact, just yesterday, and I apologize, Goys, for this, but some of the Scandinavian members of the TRS forums are starting to put out a podcast, so it's really expanding. I encourage you to get involved. Register at forums.therightstuff.biz so you can see behind the scenes and talk to some of the people there and get yourself acclimated. So with that being said, have a great day, and I hope to hear from you down the road.